Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're turning a quilt into a quillo today. So if you want to see how to make a quilt like this, please stay tuned. Let's start this video first by talking about what a quillo actually is. This is my log cabin quilt, and I'll put a picture of it here. I'm sure that you've seen it in several of my other videos. But what I did was I created a panel, and so the quilt is actually folded up into this little pocket. So if I flip it over, the quilt is actually inside here. And the quillo, it's basically a pillow made out of a quilt. And so it's, to me, this seems, it could be very convenient for just laying around, or if you need just a quick cushion for something. Also, the pocket, you know, if you're cold, your feet can kind of fit into that little pocket. So let me, I'll go over, like, you know, how to make one of these. But I've already made one with this quilt, and now I'm going to make one with my Curved Log Cabin Quilt. So I've recently finished quilting it. It's right here, and I want to turn it into a quillo. So I'm going to make the panel, and then you have to make the panel and then quilt it, and then we'll go over how to put the panel on the back of the quilt so that it can be turned into a quillo. I've already in advance, I've already measured the quilt, and my quilt is about 83 3/4 or around 83 inches, and whatever the size of your quillo, it needs to be about 1/3 that. So I'm going to be making a panel that's about 28 inches. Also, this quilt is completely quilted, but it's not bound yet. I'm going to put my quillo panel in so that it can be sewn in when I'm binding the quilt. All right, so let's go over what we're going to need, and then we'll start making the quillo. So as I get ready to create the panel for my quillo, I already had 4 leftover blocks. I set them aside before I started putting the quilt together, because I had an idea that I probably would turn this into a quillo or make a pillow to go with the quilt, something like that. So I have 4 panels that I just need to arrange in the way that I'm going to sew them together. I also have, this is leftover backing fabric, and I'm going to use this to piece the back of this panel and to add borders. So if I need this to be a little bit bigger, I'll use this fabric to add borders, and then I'm going to use it as the backing, because this panel does have to be quilted. I also have leftover batting from this quilt. I did have some pieces that I could possibly piece together, but I just didn't want to go through that. So these are some larger pieces. I think I got like a king batting to go with this quilt, and so I had a pretty good bit left over. My first step for making this panel is going to be to decide how I want to arrange these 4 pieces, and I think I'm going to go with this design. Okay, so that there's a so it's kind of like a little star, diamond, something like that in the center. I'm going to stitch both sides, and then or stitch 2 together and then stitch the other seam across. So I'll start there. Then I'm going to measure this to see how big it is to determine if I need borders. So let me stitch that, and I'll come back and we'll see how big it is. So here's the panel that I've come up with so far. I measured it, and it's about 21.5, right at 21.5 inches square. And I need about 28 inches square. So I'm going to add another 4 inches, and I think that that'll be fine. It'll put me at 21, it'll put me at about 27 and something, or a little over 28. but I think that once I quilt it, it'll shrink down a little bit and it'll be the perfect size. So right now I'm going to take my leftover fabric that I already had, and I'm going to make some 4-inch cuts. This is again leftover from the backing fabric. I'm going to fold it onto itself. It's probably, this is the selvage edge, so it won't cut exactly, I don't think. So I'm just going to line up the selvages and make a 4-inch cut. Maybe I'll get enough to do all 4 sides, but I don't know. I doubt it. So I may have to end up piecing one side, or I can use some of the other fabric that I have. I have a few strips of it that were left over. So I'm going to cut this using my rotary cutter and my ruler to get my size. Then I'll line it up and start stitching it, and we'll see what the panel starts to look like. Here is the completed panel. I did cut a little bit off the sides, but I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have waited until I get it quilted. But I've also taken some backing fabric. I did have to piece this together here, but so to make it big enough. And it's just the same backing fabric from the quilt. And there is a reason that it's this way, so I'll show it to you when I get ready to put it onto the quilt. And I have a piece of batting as well. I've already pinned this in place, and when I pinned, I would pin about a hand width apart, and so it's all pinned. Now I'm going to do some free motion quilting on it to make this quilted panel, and I will put binding. I'm going to put binding on 3 sides. So let me do both of those steps, and then I will show you what to do next. Here is the finished panel. I have quilted it, and then I cut the excess binding off, and batting off. Then I went ahead and put a binding on it. The binding is in the exact same fabric as the border of this pattern and as the backing. So now for the next step, I need to go ahead and put the binding on the quilt, and I'm gonna lay this, lay my panel down so that it will get caught in the binding as I put it on. So I'm going to put it in the middle third of this quilt top or quilt, and I'm just going to kind of fold it over and estimate. Yeah, that should be good, I think. All right, and I'm laying it with the backing fabric facing up, and this is so that when the quilt is out, this part will blend in, but then when it's folded, we're actually going to see the panel part, and I'll show you that as we get as it gets done. So first I'm just gonna put some pins in here just to kind of loosely hold it in place, and I have the binding already made. So I'm just going to stitch the binding on with a 1/4-inch seam. I do like to sometimes hand stitch the last part of the binding, but for this quilt, since I'm doing a panel, I'm not going to hand quilt it. So I'm going to sew this on the binding on from the back, and then flip it over and stitch it down with the machine on the front, just so that that everything is together. And I feel like the sewing machine may hold it a little bit better than my hand stitches. So I'm almost done pinning this, and then I'm going to place my binding on the back side and then flip it over to the front, and I'll show you what it looks like. The panel is finally attached. I have the entire binding on the quilt, and all I did for this panel, you can see that it is tacked down. I just tacked on each side about halfway down, and then at the bottom. And for tacking, all I did was just stitch, this looks like about a 1-inch line, and I just stitched it back and forth, maybe about 5 or 6 times, just to give it some stability, so that when I get ready to fold it, it'll actually hold its shape there. So if you when I turn the quilt over, you can see that you can't really tell where it's been tacked. I'll show you, but if you're not really looking for it, you won't be able to see it in all the quilting. So the tacking is, let me see, I can see it here, here, and then at the bottom there, okay? But again, not too noticeable. Now that the quilt is finished, I want to show you how to fold it up. Remember that we put the panel in the middle third. So the first thing that we need to do is fold the outside thirds in, and they should make a nice line here. Okay. And if I can see the panel hanging out on both sides, that's perfect. Then I'm going to begin folding it up onto itself. And since, again, this quilt is square and it's in thirds, so I'm going to fold it 2 times. So 1, and then 2. Okay. And for the last step, I'm actually going to bring the panel over, and I'm going to fold this quilt onto itself. So pulling it through, and since I just tacked it down, I didn't sew it down down the whole side, I have a little bit of flexibility with how I pull this. Okay, so I'm just giving it some gentle encouragement. Okay, and then after I get it all in there, and I'm sure there's probably an easier way to make this panel, but I like it. I like doing it this way. And so I'm just kind of pulling and tugging so that the panel section is now out and folded over the quilt. I'm so excited with the way that this Quillow came out. Even though the panel is a little big, I still think it's totally cute, and it can be used as a cushion or as a pillow, and you can still kind of fold it, you know, a little bit to make it fit the space that you need it to. If you have any questions about this Quillow or about the process, please leave them in the comments below. It's a really great thing to do with, I think, with any quilt that you make. Cameron sends a thank you for all the well wishes that he received, and I'm thankful for that too. Thank you for just sending him a few get wells. We appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thumbs up the video, share it with your friends. The only thing that I have to do with this is make a quilt label, which I'm going to do and make a video about it because somebody asked. So I will see you next time. Thanks again for watching. Bye!